It's been a week, I think, since I last streamed, but welcome. Good to see you all. Doctor Obvious, great to have you. Good to see you. Philip, would leave a number two joke, but but it won't be about Martin Luther. Yeah, that's a good one. Um, yeah, guys, and Philip, welcome. Sandro, 365th. Oh, you're delayed. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell, welcome. Dave F., great to have you on a live. Sergeant Grinch. So, guys, yes, thanks all for being here. Tonight we'll talk about Gnosticism versus the early church, look at some early church history. Tonight the focus is on women in the early church, women, how they're perceived under Christianity, and of course the narrative that Gnosticism spins about how well they treat women versus how badly and misogynistic the Christians are. We want to have a look at that today. And yeah, I was tasked with something at work. I got given a project and short deadline, a surprise project, and I delivered it today, which is ahead of schedule. But it took up all of my free time. I was slammed for like 4 or 5 days solid, and I just needed to get the project done so that if there were any last minute things, I could get them done next week. But looks like I finished it today, so that is out of the way. Sergeant Grinch says it's so difficult being in a secret society these days. It's virtually impossible to find a virgin to sacrifice. Yeah, one does wonder though where all those missing children go, right? This what's it the movie The Sound of Thunder? What was that movie with child the the child disappearances? Yeah, the movie was fantastic. Really liked it. But yeah, one has to wonder sometimes. So adrenochrome, yeah. Well, okay. So before we begin, of course, I want to talk about something else that happened this week. So one of my subscribers tagged me on Twitter on X because this guy Martin A. Wuther, um, who's a Protestant Twitter subscriber, so I can write lengthy posts and all that, was writing about Luther, and she tagged me on this particular post. And he says Catholic historian Hartman Grisar wrote that it's not a good idea to use quotations from Martin Luther's Table Talks, right? Because these are spur of the moment. So he's using this book, Martin Luther's Life and Work, published in 1950 by Hartman Grisar. Now, of course, Grisar is saying this. Now, do understand that today we have more sources more easily available to us than they did then. So, for instance, I have the entire Luther's works in 58 volumes. Until recently, people only had 55. So I can search through his entire source. And with my software, I can download other resources and search and index through those. So anyway, so he was trying to basically say that the Luther's Table Talks are a weak hadith. Now, there is no way you can compare these to, yes, the weak hadith, exactly. Luther's Table Talks were collected by highly qualified scholars, at least within the Protestant ranks, right? These are people who'd spent years and years, decades with Luther, from multiple people who were with him, multiple people who contemporaneously wrote down some of these quotes of Luther's. They were collecting them before Luther's death. They compiled them and published them after Luther's death. And these were not written 150, 200, 300 years after the death of Muhammad. These were written and collected before he died and then published. And of course, these are not just Johnny-come-latelys. These are qualified priests, theologians, educated men of the time, as highly educated as any people can be. Right? These are priests with decades of service in the government, in the military, in their churches, in their parishes. So these are bishops and senior people. Now, for instance, Hartman Grisar, while he might have said that quote, he also then says other things, obviously, but also Luther's Table Talks were known as the Divine Discourses before the name was changed. Hello, welcome Artifati, welcome Century Since, Magnum Opus. Okay, so yeah, anywho, so for instance, I mentioned a testimonial for one of Luther's disciples. Now also Hartman Grisar, who wrote Luther's a 6-volume biography of Luther, extensively quoted from the Table Talks. They are officially part of Luther's works. Now, I find it odd that these are officially part of Luther's works, but Mr. Nobody on the internet wants to tell us these are weak hadiths when they are a formal part of Luther's works. They're used by scholars, they provide context, they provide additional details, they provide information that is missing. And of course, they'll try and excuse them as, Luther was just being verbose, or Luther was just being, speaking off the cuff, etc. But once you start to look at the pattern of speech, his reckless speech, his incitement of violence, and you start to see it happens over and over and over, it's not a once-off. Now, he might be more considered in some of his other writings, but then he's got time to think, and also he's writing propagandistically. He wrote propaganda for his paymasters. Whereas often when he was speaking off the cuff, the truth would come out. And sometimes this truth contradicts what he writes elsewhere, and in fact, he often contradicts himself. So, for instance, Johann Aurifaber, Doctrine and Divinity concerning Luther's divine discourses. And whereas hitherto I've caused certain tomes of the books, sermons, writings, and missives of Luther to be printed at Eisleben, so have I also now finished this tome of his discourses and have ordered the same to be printed. So there was a record done, right? And these were collected together out of the manuscripts of these divine discourses. Reverend Father Anthony Lauterbach himself noted and wrote out the holy mouth of Luther. Now this person goes on to say, well, Luther never claimed to be holy. Luther never claimed to be inspired and speak for God. And so I started quoting him where Luther claims to be a prophet, where Luther claims to be speaking for God, where I did nothing. God did everything. Christ did everything. In fact, the word just poured out of me because the Holy Spirit was just washing through me into my hand and onto the page. And then, of course, he loses his calm exterior. And then, of course, he says that, where are you getting all this stuff? So he writes to me, where are you getting all this stuff? Where are you getting all this nonsense? Why are you making this up? So I started quoting him very specific quotes, several, to deal with these. And of course he said, you see what you're doing? You're quoting out of context. Everything's out of context. Those quotes don't mean what you say they mean. These quotes do not mean what they... I'm like, so the words don't mean what they say. This is Quranic, the miracle of Quranic reinterpretation, as David Wood tells us when it comes to Muslims and their apologetics. So he says, I don't deny Luther was reckless in speech. Aren't you and I? Well, look, I didn't start a new religion and get millions of people killed because of it, right? Luther should be a little more careful about his speech because of his influence. And of course, then I said to him, what about Luther's incitement to violence for Jews? What about Luther saying that Jews should be put to death if they preach or if they read from the Talmud and so on? What about Luther saying they corrupted the Bible? What about Luther saying that their possessions should be burned, they should be enslaved, and they should be made to work? Of course, he ignored all of that because reasons, right? And then when I quoted him all of these sources, like on the prophet Martin Luther, right? When I quoted all of these things to even Martin Luther's friends calling him a prophet, and Martin Luther's colleagues calling him a prophet, and Martin Luther refusing to deal with this, then of course that's not an answer, and you know it. Now, I've just provided detailed citations from Luther's works, from secondary sources directly linked to Luther. We're not talking 300 years later, from people who lived, spent time, and spent decades with Luther, right? And of course, so eventually he was like, you see what you're doing? You are just corrupting and twisting everything. I'm not going to deal with you. So of course, I quoted everything, right? You should rather say whether Luther is a rascal or a saint, I do not care, because his teaching is not his, but Christ's, because Luther is teaching Christ. Hey, Francis, very welcome. See you on Sunday. Conociendo al Islam. Welcome, Nicodemus. Welcome. So anyway, Luther never claimed to speak directly for God, so I quoted him several quotes on that. I did nothing. The Word did everything. That's straight out of Luther's works. I quoted that for him. Okay? And then he's like, where are you getting these from? I just showed him. It's from Luther's works. This is straight out of Luther's mouth. Right? This is from Luther's own handwriting in his own books. Then I quoted, let whoever can stab, smite, slay. And if you die in doing it, good for you. A more blessed death can never be yours. So that's the jihad against the farmers, against the peasants that Luther recommended that everyone kill for, and they'll get reward in heaven for it. And he's like, none of this says what you think it says. So let whoever can stab, smite, and slay. Apparently, that doesn't say what it says. So there's a word for this. It starts with a B and it ends with a T, right? I think we all know what it is. And then he says, see what I mean? So without being able to refute these, he just simply dismissed them as, so eventually he says, you're just lying to me and bye. And so somewhere over here he writes like, Yeah, you're just doubling down. You see, you're not being sincere or open. You're just doubling down in intent of being right no matter what. Bye. So this is dishonesty. This is Protestant Abdulism. This is Islamic Abdulism for Protestants, quite bluntly, because Muslims do exactly the same thing. So, and then he posts on his Twitter. He actually posted on his Twitter, like how people are. Gee whiz, he wrote something about wow, people are really coming out and people are really salty and whatnot. Somewhere on his anyway, he wrote a post afterwards like how people are really salty about Luther and they just need to get over it. These and yeah. So anyway, that's these things happen. So the issue is perhaps I need to start challenging people directly because I believe people are not willing to engage with me because they realize I have a pile of research and I have a huge war chest of information that I can bring to bear, and so that I guess they're hoping that I'll just go away, right? That and so yeah, but perhaps I need to start challenging people directly because when people say that I disagree with Lloyd because I believe he's factually wrong, then if you think that I'm wrong, in which case I have false evidence or I am mistaken or I'm in error, or maybe I'm lying, fine. Then show me where. Show me where, right? So let me see. So have I missed any comments? So basically those are abrogated. No, those are not abrogated, Domine Miserere. Yeah, they vehemently appeal to ignorance yet embrace the embellishments. I'm not sure what that means. Uh, okay. Yeah. So yeah. Francis Bull. So thank you, Francis. So anyway, we'll see. So guys, let's dive into this discussion. Yeah, they're preordained to be fools, Sergeant Grinch. Thanks for clarifying. You need to challenge them. Luther was a monster. Yeah. It's very difficult going against that narrative. That narrative is heavily entrenched and it's heavily defended. Mike Simao says, I've already used your works to show how Calvin was satanic and had the same response. Yes, I mean, of course, they have to believe you're wrong, right? They've been told this their whole life. So yeah, they'd rather just hope I go away, hope that silence will actually just make it disappear rather than engaging with it. So yeah, I debate you on confirmation bias. Last time I pointed out to you, you called me an idiot and got one of your mods to shut me up for a bit. Probably rightly so. Probably rightly so. So let's dive into today's topic. Right. So let me see. Absalom's tube. I'd like to understand the affection Catholics have for Mary. I can understand it, but I can't feel it myself. Well, because Luther lied to you. Very simple. When in doubt, tell yourself the following: Martin Luther lied to me. Then everyone else believed those lies. They repeated those lies. Calvin altered those lies to suit his particular narrative. All the other Protestants invented their own series of lies, and the worst lies, sorry, excuse my French here, but the worst lies are the Baptists. Okay, the Baptists seem to have really taken this to another level. And of course, then you've got the non-Christians, who, your Mormons, your Seventh-day Adventists, your Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. But the Baptists, I am busy working on some stuff on the Baptists. I mean, good grief, they really decided to crank that particular theme up to 11. Yeah. Okay, so let us continue. Now, I've already discussed there's no evidence that Jesus married. All right, there's not a single text which makes any such definitive claim, right? And of course, we see how these Gnostics and of course these scholars that come afterwards misrepresent those Gnostic claims. So now let's have a last look, okay, at Strong G 5370, Philema, right? So the kiss from Jesus in Gnostic text symbolizes the transmission of spiritual energy. So of course Dan Brown takes this and says, look, this is a literal kiss. Right, but of course this is not a literal kiss. This is meant to be a joining of the Christos and the Sophia. I need to fix my camera again. Let me just do that. Okay, that's fine. Let me just adjust my camera. Right, and then of course they fix the pleroma because the pleroma is divided. So once these two kiss, they share knowledge and they become whole again. They become unified at the pleroma. So it's not a physical thing. It's purely symbolic. Right? So, of course, Dan Brown makes this literal. So the kiss from Jesus in Gnostic text symbolizes the transmission of spiritual energy, the knowledge, or divine wisdom to the recipient, making them spiritually advanced. That's why you have the divine wisdom, which is a potential heresy, because this speaks of being kissed. And then thus, It's like a romance, like a love affair with Jesus. Now, even Luther, when you listen to the guy who wrote Dominion, the historian that wrote Dominion. Sorry, let me just get the name of uh, Tom Holland. The Dominion author Tom Holland, he writes about Luther in the very same context as Luther was in a love affair with God. He was in a romance. So he was having a love affair with this idea, this feeling of God, this direct, intimate connection, which is really a Sufi connection. It's a Gnostic connection. It's direct communion. So this, in that real sense, is a mystical connection, which is entirely, shall we say, emotionally based. And this is him receiving this divine wisdom. How can you have so much patience to read so much nonsensical books? Yeah, I sometimes I have to take a break. There are times I actually have to take a break because I just want to scream. I want to throw things at the screen. It is so frustrating. Tom Holland. Yes, thanks, Alethea. Right. Yeah. So the spiritual exchange through kissing is Gnostic inner spiritual knowledge and enlightenment, which differs from the more common Christian concept of grace. See, so this bypasses the intercession of the church, and it's like, well, God talks to me directly. I am special, right? So in the context of Gnostic beliefs, the repeated kissing of Mary Magdalene by Jesus signifies her spiritual advancement and enlightenment compared to the disciples. The disciples are confused and offended at Jesus showing favoritism towards Mary. Now, the use of the term holy kiss in the Bible, in Paul's letters particularly, shows that this kind of behavior was actually common within that period, right? It was appropriate, right, in the Jewish cultural and religious context. For instance, in the Bible, we hear often, greet all the brethren with the holy kiss, the philema. So the kiss with which, as a sign of fraternal affection, like brotherly love, Christians were accustomed to welcome or dismiss their companions in the faith. But the Gnostic kiss is different. It has a different meaning attached to it. So some researchers try to equate the word companion with consort. So they take this very common concept and they try to say, no, Mary was his consort. In other words, he was, consorting with her. This is often in error as it's based on English usage. So a wife is a companion, but this is a very basic level designation that applies to other people. As we saw from the Greek, companion could be a companion in a business, in your lettuce and cabbage business, right? A wife is a companion, right? But a wife is not necessarily a consort. That's a different connotation. It has semantic variability, which is called valency in linguistics. There is no necessary sexual linkage in the meaning of the word companion. It's actually a fairly neutral term, a companion. My buddy, like if you look at the companions, like the Lord of the Rings, right? The companions who went on the ring quest, they weren't diddling each other. They were companions in a quest, in a venture, in some kind of enterprise. Okay, so right, let me continue. So companion is not consort. So consider the relationship between the words like companion and consort. Do they always imply the same meaning? Obviously not, right? With Jesus and Mary, Mary is often referred to as Jesus' companion, but that does not imply romantic relationship because Jesus also had male companions. So utilizing this logic, now Jesus would have to be gay. Do you understand the how this thing just spirals out of control, right? Because he had male companions. I mean, Judas kissed him. Were they having a romantic relationship? Or did that kiss not end well? Did this whole kissing business by Judas, imply something else? So the historical texts show no explicit mention of romantic involvement between Jesus and Mary. So we have to stick to what the primary sources actually say, not what we think they say or want them to say, what they actually say. So fictional narratives, like those by Dan Brown, are fantastic for fiction, for entertainment. They're not historical. So we have to differentiate between a compelling storyline, fictional, and historical accuracy. So that ends that section. So now let's jump to how Christianity elevated women. Now, again, I've spoken about Mary at length in Did Jesus and Mary marry, right? You can have a look at that to discuss more on that topic. So Christianity elevated women. Now, this is one issue, one area where Christianity is attacked because they claim that Christianity is misogynistic. And we've all seen, I think, or many of us will have seen the talk with, God, the Canadian psychologist. Now I've forgotten his name. Good grief. I'm really tired. It's been a tough week. And by the way, so by the way, so yeah, I've been playing with some stuff. I've been talking to some people. As you know, I always have like a bunch of these things lying on my desk. You know, these goodies. This is a blunt one. It's completely blunt training. And then of course I've got like these guys training. So yeah, I'm busy talking to some people, and if things go well, I might have the opportunity to go and yeah, yeah. Anyway, so there might be something fun happening, which might bring me to go and visit some people who do bad things to bad people. But it'll be great if I can go and help out there. Okay, so now the historical context of Jewish, early Christian, and Gnostic circles often has a very low view of women, right? So, despite the prevailing low view of women in the New Testament era, the New Testament started to elevate women above the societal norms of the time. Jesus treated women very well. He forgave them. He spoke to Samaritans, who were normally of a lower class. So he would speak to people. He allowed women to become part of his group that became his companions, and they also carried his message. They also, were part of the people that were spreading the gospel. So this was unheard of within that social climate. So the stories, teachings, and interactions of Jesus and his followers often show respect, inclusion, and female equality, which challenged all of the cultural expectations of the era. This does not mean he made them priests. There is no example of Jesus elevating a woman to the priesthood. There is no example. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, Francis. No, there's stuff that I do that I've been approached by. I've been talking to some people, and yeah, it's fairly specialized, and there's an interest. And but these are, yeah. So I mean, I might be invited to a particular facility if all goes well, and I might be doing some teaching out there. So for people who, yeah, tend to be fairly anonymous. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so yeah. So Jesus' inclusion of women as followers who traveled with him was revolutionary and unheard of in this patriarchal culture of the day. Okay. The New Testament has examples of women like Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna who supported Jesus and his ministry, going against all the traditional gender roles and expectations, right? So the portrayal of women in the New Testament challenges the broader culture of the time, right? The New Testament shows that women were participants, active participants in the ministry of Jesus and the early church, contradicting the standard gender roles of the day and expectations. Now, the question of women's ordination in Christian circles is controversial today, right? But the examples of women's leadership and involvement in the New Testament is supportive of women's participation in religious leadership roles of the era. Notice there's a difference in being involved in religious leadership and evangelization versus being part of the clergy, because there's a distinction here. Alethea, you're most welcome. Thank you. Glad you liked it. So let me see if I've missed anything. So let's see. Yeah, so if women were not found in elevated social and ecclesiastical situations in the New Testament and the early church, there would be no reason to have a scriptural debate on whether women can be ordained. So the only reason that there is, so in other words, you wouldn't be having a discussion, can women be ordained? Can women join the clergy? Can they be part of the priesthood? Because clearly within the New Testament context, suddenly women had a very high status, very high social status within that particular cultural context. So therefore there is this debate. But we're not going to delve too heavily in that. So let's have a look at the enlightened Gnostics, a la Dan Brown, and of course the misogynistic Christians. So the Judeo-Christian worldview is criticized as unfavorable to women compared to the Gnostic Gospels, because the Gnostics, of course, had this elevated view of women. We've already discussed how false that is and how they thought of women. Don't forget, for the Gnostics, just like in Islam, women comprise the largest element of hell, right? Because women are sucked into that vortex at the bottom of the world because women are unclean. Women have to become men to become clean to be accepted, right? So yeah, women are the largest fraction of hell according to Islam and Muhammad, and of course according to the Gnostics too. So now the Judeo-Christian worldview is negative, while Gnostic beliefs are praised. That's common. So now Josephus against Apion, Book 2, Section 25. But then, what are our laws about marriage? That law owns no other mixture of sexes but that which nature hath appointed, of a man with his wife, and that this be used only for the procreation of children. So now you've got a view from Josephus, the Jewish scholar, that sex is only for having children, nothing else, right? No recreational idea, okay? But it abhors the mixture of a male with a male, and if anyone do that, death is its punishment. It commands us also, when we marry, not to have regard to portion, nor to take a woman by violence, nor to persuade her deceitfully and knavishly, but to demand her in marriage of him who hath power to dispose of her, and is fit to give her away by the nearness of his kindred. For, says the Scripture, a woman is inferior to her husband in all things. Now, one could say that that is misinterpreted or interpreted in a way that suits a particular narrative or agenda. Right? And that's Josephus against Apion, Book 2, pt5. Now, says the Scripture, okay? Says the Scripture, a woman is inferior to her husband, but this is not found in the Bible. This is not in Scripture. The oral tradition in Judaism, including the Talmud and the Mishnah, was held in high regard. It was considered by many of these very Orthodox Jews to be on the same level as Scripture. Now, Josephus is quoting a prevailing opinion of the day, and this is in extra-biblical literature. So this means that the opinions and teachings found in this extra-biblical literature held significant weight in the Jewish culture, in the Jewish understanding. Now, Josephus is a first-century Jewish historian and military leader. He was born in Jerusalem, later became a Roman citizen. He's best known for his work, The Jewish War. Right? This recounted the Jewish revolt against Roman rule and antiquities of the Jews. This provided a comprehensive history of Jewish people. So he played a role in the Great Jewish Revolt against Rome, and eventually he became a trusted advisor to the Roman Emperor Vespasian. So let's see. Artsy Fartsy says, even in Samuel, Tamar's half-brother was killed for raping her and not marrying her first. He destroyed her dignity. Yeah, that's and that's how that was back in the day, right? So after this, he says that God formed man by taking clay from the earth, and he breathed into his face the breath of life. By this also he shows very clearly that there is a vast difference between the man now formed and the man that came into existence earlier, after the image of God. For the man now formed is an object of sense perception, partakes already of quality, consists of body and soul, is man or woman, and by nature mortal. But the man who came into existence after the image of God is what one might call an idea or a genus or a seal, an object of thought, incorporeal, neither male nor female, by nature incorruptible. Woman not only entices sexual desire in the man, but is also the source of aesthesis, the irrational quality of the soul. The soul's rational quality is called nous, and corresponds to man. Philo tells us earlier that the nous is patterned after God, and thus the woman, who has no part in the nous, is not fashioned in the image of God. That's Philo on the Creation, section 134. So yeah, women only entice sexual desire in men, but women are not fashioned in the image of God. Now notice this little bit of a parallel there to Islam, that women have to be clothed in bin bags because they just exist to entice men sexually. Do you see this idea, this let's just say not exactly biblical idea, not exactly a New Testament idea of women? So you have this paraphrasing and all of this twisting, and then boom, into Islam. Women have to be dressed in rags and bin bags, or dressed like letterboxes, because you can't have them, enticing men. So, right. So the nous is a Greek term that refers to the mind, the intellect, the faculty of understanding in philosophical and theological contexts. So the woman has no part in the nous. Now think back to Islam. Guys, can we talk about the topic at hand rather than having this off-topic discussion? Right. So what you have is now, the nous is a term that refers to the intellect, the faculty of mind. Women do not take part in this faculty of mind. Women are... Think about Islam. What does Islam do? Well, women shouldn't go to school. Women shouldn't go to university. Women should stay at home and make babies. right? They should just do this whole procreation. Think of that and think about where this comes from this Jewish milieu, right? Where you've got these ideas that are extra biblical, punted by these particular Jewish authors. And this is not the Christian view, but some of this certainly does make its way into Islam. Now, the term nous has connections to Gnostic philosophy, where it is often used to refer to a higher spiritual or divine intelligence beyond the material world. So in Gnostic thought, the nous is associated with the mind's ability to perceive spiritual truths and the spark of divine wisdom within individuals. Now notice here, the view is that, of course, now you got the other Gnostic view that of Jesus and Mary and blah, 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 right? Where she is capable of doing so. Now, woman is not fashioned in God's image. So, the woman who has no part in the nous is not fashioned in the image of God. Now, this is the exact opposite of Genesis 1:26 to 27, right? So, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:27. So, understand, Philo is here utilizing a Gnostic idea. This is not the biblical idea. So, this runs contrary and opposite to the Christian view, but also to the Old Testament view, not the Hebrew Bible. Philo must be receiving his views from oral tradition. So this is not biblical, it's oral. So somehow this oral tradition was supplanting the written biblical tradition. So here you've got this prevailing attitude in educated Jewish circles in this period. So you've got this idea. Now, and the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden." Why did the serpent accost the woman and not the man in Genesis 3? The serpent, having formed his estimate of virtue, devised a treacherous stratagem, right, a plan against them, for the sake of bringing mortality on them. But the woman was more accustomed to be deceived than the man. Women are more easily led astray, according to Philo, for his counsels as well as his body are of a masculine sort, and competent to disentangle the notions of seduction. But the mind of the woman is more effeminate, so that through her softness she easily yields and is easily caught by the persuasions of falsehood, which imitate the resemblance of truth. Philo, Questions and Answers on Genesis, Book 1, Section 33. So this seems to be a little bit of a low personal opinion of women, which seems to be part of the general culture of the day, which is more in line with the Gnostic idea in some senses than it is. It's certainly not in line with the biblical view, not the Christian view, certainly. Now, Philo believes women to be passion-driven while men are rational. In the arena of sexuality, men were supposed to keep women's sexuality under control. Does that sound familiar in terms of Islam? Men must keep women's sexuality under control, dress them in letterboxes. In marriage, sex was to be ignored except when it was necessary in order to procreate. Wives must be slaves to their husbands, Philo says. You wonder if Philo was a Muslim, Francis. Yeah, it's like you've got to ask yourself these parallels, right? These parallels, I mean, they're clear parallels here. Clearly, these ideas came from one source and made their way to another, right? So wives must be slaves to their husbands. Now, did Jesus talk about slavery? I don't think so. A servitude not imposed by violent ill treatment. No. Just tap them with a toothbrush. Don't beat them with the actual whip. Just tap them with a toothbrush. But promoting obedience in all things. So she has to be a slave to her husband, but don't impose it by violent ill treatment. Just make sure she's obedient. How? So that's Philo, Hypothetica 7.3. So now, general attitudes in women. So the Bible does not indicate that women are dumber than men. Philo did, but the Bible doesn't say that. Islam does. Women are worth half of men. It is better that the words of the law should be burned than that they should be given to a woman. That's in the Talmud. Tractate J. Sota 3:4-19a. So, fascinating. Now, for those who claim that Lloyd defends the Talmud, Lloyd's Jewish, surely works for Mossad. No, I just don't like people lying about the Talmud, and 99.9% of you are just lying about the Talmud. There are certainly concerns, and I've raised those in the past, but of course those get ignored because whatever. But yeah, there are issues, but there are genuine issues that can be discussed rather than lied about. So it is better that the words of the law, the Torah, should be burned and that should be given to a woman. That's a pretty low view of women. And Jesus was allowing women to join his group and to evangelize. So The comment is from the Jerusalem Talmud and is omitted in the later Babylonian Talmud. So there's a development. There's actually a historical development, an improvement there. He that talks much with women brings evil upon himself, neglects the study of the Torah, and at last will inherit Gehenna. Talmud Tractate Eme Both. Okay. So now notice who spoke much with women. Who spoke with the woman at the well? Right? Who spoke and with the woman that was caught in adultery and let her go? Jesus. Understand? So from that context of the day, the fact that Jesus was speaking to these sinful women, he was going against this particular culture. That's a fair point. Mr. Rock makes a very interesting point here, actually. That's a really good point. Christianity stands out. Catholicism specifically, he says, hold on, let me just bring this up here. Actually, just bring that up. Right? Christianity really stands out. Catholicism specifically. Every religion literally hates women. Meanwhile, we hold Mary to be the greatest of all creation. Yes, that's a fairly interesting and very compelling point there. That's a very interesting point. Note that. Francis Bull says, I can't help but notice under the Islamic rule, women are second-class citizens and they are menstruating, don't even ask. Yeah, you can't touch them. Many Muslims, like in the Middle East, they won't even touch a woman anyway, just in case. You just never know. They just refuse. They'll come to a woman and they'll put their hands on their chest like this. Actually, hold on. I need to just fix my freaking camera again. It keeps doing this. Auto tracking is on. Where the heck? Okay, it's off. Yep. So they'll put their hand on their chest like this because they'll nod and bend or whatever, bow, but they will not touch a woman, which is really insulting. Actually, it's incredibly insulting when that happens. So note that Jesus often speaks to women in the New Testament, and his behavior goes against this. So women were not allowed to testify in a court of law. Interesting. The rabbis taught this is the governing principle. Any evidence which a woman is not valid to offer testimony, okay? Also, they are not valid to offer testimony. Here's one problem I have with the Talmudic and Jewish writings. They are really hard to. The language they use is really difficult to understand. It's like you can't read it at face value sometimes. That might seem odd, but you really can't. The Talmud is like it's written in a way that just doesn't make it easy to understand and looks bad, to be quite honest. In some cases, it's really freaky. But notice this idea. Look, I could have a typo here. I could have this wrong, okay? But the point being that women are not valid to offer testimony, right? So the simple thing is that this is very similar to Islam, right? Islam makes a small change to that, but this idea existed, whereas in Christianity, this is not the case. So Simon Peter said to him, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. And Jesus said, now this is in the Gospel of Thomas, I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. So yes, so let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. Now, of course, this is where this twit on Twitter will go, well, the words don't mean what they say. Say the words actually don't mean that. What they mean is, I'll explain it to you. Yeah, it says women are not worthy of life. I can read, right? So Jesus has to lead Mary to make her male so that she can become a living spirit resembling you males because she has no part of the nous. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven, because women who don't have the nous don't inherit the kingdom of. You see, this all goes back. So you've got all of these ideas, these crazy ideas from Philo and odd ideas that Josephus tells us existed within that Jewish milieu, and then they make their way straight into Gnosticism, and everyone's adding their own little, as we would say in Afrikaans, hulle plak net stamps op. In other words, that's slang for everyone is just sticking on their own changes and additions and just whatever, just making it up as they go. So the idea that Gnosticism elevates women and Christians are cultural cavemen is a complete myth. Right? Now, let's look at Beruria, or Beruraya, right? So this is from Jewish Women's Archive, sharing stories, inspiring change, the Shalvi, or Hyman Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, okay? In some Gnostic texts, such as the Apocryphon of John, there is a dualistic understanding of gender where the feminine is associated with darkness. So now I've got a different Gnostic text where women are associated with evil. And they're associated with the material world, they're associated with ignorance and imperfection, while the masculine is associated with the divine, with knowledge and perfection. I'd say that's a fairly low view of women and an elevated view of men, right? Now, this led to beliefs that women are inferior or disconnected from the divine nous. We've already seen that. Yes, centuries since the Gospel of Thomas does seem to be the earliest of the Gnostic Gospels. Don't forget, it's not really a gospel. It's a series of sayings. It's like the Book of Ecclesiastes. It's just a series of sayings, like random sayings. So let's look at the Tractate Avot. It says, "Speak not much with a woman." Let me actually bring up the source. This is here, Beruria, this Schalviheimer Encyclopedia of Women. That's a discussion going on here. Okay, so Beruria is the only woman mentioned in rabbinic literature who studies the Torah. Right, she's the only woman in the rabbinic literature who studies the Torah. That sets her apart. She delivers halachic or legal and homiletical statements in the Tosefta and the Babylonian Talmud. Described as a prodigious learner, she was a great scholar. So think about Aisha, who was also a great scholar. Weird, right? So later medieval traditions neutralized her with a tragic death after she mocked a rabbinic dictum about women's light-headedness. So the rabbis were saying, women are light-headed, women, don't have much brains, and then she mocked that, and of course then her history had to be rewritten. So now the Tosefta has a very dim memory, right? Preserves a very dim memory of a woman who may once have studied with the rabbis. The Tosefta are extra-biblical books that are part of this whole tradition within the Talmud. Is not just one set. You've got the Talmud, the Mishnah, you've got the Tosefta, and you've got other. So that's just one of the. It's like one of the collections of rabbinic writings, right? So the Tosefta has a very dim memory of a woman who may have once studied with the rabbis and left an impression on them, a positive impression. So the Babylonian Talmud mentions her as a great scholar and a very clever woman, and then the story changes. The story once again changes. Now, in the future, perhaps I'll talk about the Hebrew Bible and how the presence of Christianity and Jesus' teaching seems to have influenced the rabbis, and they changed some of their texts. They changed some of their texts to counter Christianity. Now, of course, everyone's going to lose their minds and go, "Oh my God, the Jews have to die because they don't believe in Jesus." Well, neither do the Buddhists. I don't see you calling for the death of the Buddhists. Guess it's double standards. So, in order to prove her wrong, Rabbi Meir sent a student to seduce her. He succeeds in seducing her. When she found out, she was so ashamed she hung herself. So they had to change the story to get out of the picture. So transforming Beruria's story into a cautionary tale for women, right? So Torah scholars reflect a patriarchal attitude, right? Reflect a patriarchal attitude towards women's involvement in religious study. Remember, they're not supposed to be involved, and therefore they're not supposed to have the ability to become scholars. So instead of being celebrated for her intelligence and knowledge, Beruria becomes a tragic figure. She's in pursuit of Torah study, and this leads to her downfall. She should have stayed at home and made sandwiches in the kitchen. So this interpretation attempts to discourage women's spiritual and intellectual pursuits. Whereas you go to Islam, something similar happens, except that they crank it up to 11. So let's have a look at the Testament of Job. So are you guys learning something useful here? Hopefully this is something of interest historically, and you can look at the development of the early church and the New Testament text within a historical context, and actually see how this differs from what we have in the writings of Jewish writers. Some of them are biblical, some of them are extra biblical, some of them are just off the charts, right? They've just gone off the cliff. And then of course you've got these Gnostics. So you can see there's this less than positive view of women within these extra biblical views. Jesus and the apostles had a completely different view of women, completely different to the common attack on Christianity, which is ahistorical. So let me see. So Mr. Rock says, in Luke 1:28, we see an archangel speak to Mary, calling her full of grace. A praise unseen before between angels and men, let alone women. Fantastic, yeah. Okay. Artsy Fartsy said, I learned I would hate to be a Muslim woman. Yeah, it's pretty bad. We can talk about that one day in Islam. I can switch to the Sharia and we can do some of that sometime. So thank you for the positive comments. Much appreciated. Thank you. So for those who do get value, please do like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, annoy people with this information. Go out there and annoy people. Use this because Christianity is under attack. Okay, it's bad enough you got Martin Luther that did his thing, but seriously, they're good Protestants. They are great Catholics. There's some completely, yeah, yeah, and on both sides there's some pretty bad people on both sides. All right, so we need to stomp on those, and we need to promote the good ones, and we need to get the good message out there, historical message. Okay, so Job's three daughters in the Testament of Job speak the dialect of angels. So these women speak the dialect of angels. That's a fantastic gift to have, right? According to the non-canonical book, right? That's non-canonical. And this one, don't ask me about the source. I have no idea who Charles A. Sullivan is, but that's the source that I'm using here. It's charlesasullivan.com. Look that up. The Testament of Job and Angelic Tongues. So, dating from before 100 BC, it retells and expands, typo, oopsie, the biblical book of Job with additional elements. So they're not adding to this, right? So the manuscript may have been influenced by the Montanists. Montanists are a second century. Now, when they say Christian, don't believe that they are heretics. They're heretical, okay? Group known for their prophetic and ecstatic speech, including women. This is going to obviously get into, let's not even go there let's not even do that bit. So the idea of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, that's the subject we don't want to talk about, is seen as utterances approximating words and speech, usually produced during states of intense religious experience. It is not considered miraculous, but a psychological condition. Fascinating stuff. So the author integrates elements from the Greek prophets of Delphi who entered into ecstatic states, resulting in apocalyptic and prophetic utterances. The story also incorporates the contemporary Jewish belief in the presence and hierarchy of angels during worship, right? So this is from Hellenistic first century Jewish thought, because you've got Jews who've moved to Greece and they are speaking Greek. They don't speak Hebrew. Now, what is fascinating is, I'll just give you a quick historical aside. So this guy called Martin Luther comes along, and Martin Luther decides that, well, unless a book in the Old Testament is available strictly in Hebrew, it's got to go. It's got to go. These books, they has got to go because they're not in the Hebrew. Of course, later on, these books that are only in the Greek, right, only available in the Greek, they are discovered in the Hebrew, and Protestants go, yeah, sorry, we made a mistake, let's fix it, let's put them back in the... Of course not. Of hypocrites, because that would be endorsing the Catholic view, and we can't have that now, can we? Because that would be wrong, because then we don't apologize for mistakes. We have double standards. If we didn't have double standards, we wouldn't have any standards. What's odd is, though, that you had these Greeks that were Jewish Greeks, right? And they didn't speak Hebrew. So Jewish scholars had to go, okay, I guess we need a Greek Bible now. So they had to create the Septuagint, right? So the Jewish scholars took the Hebrew, and according to the Jewish legend, according to the Jewish story, they faithfully, rigorously translated the Hebrew to Greek, making no mistakes. They did it really, really well. And then, of course, Luther says, well, unless these books are available in Hebrew, we're throwing them out. That's in complete contradiction to the Jewish view that they took these books faithfully from the Hebrew into the Greek so that the Hebrew texts would be available for Greek-speaking Jews. So, but yeah, logical consistency, honesty was definitely not something that Martin Luther was big on. He was very small on that. Okay, let's continue. So the translation of the text by Spittler, Pentecostal, includes the word ecstatically, which is not present in the Greek original, and it's an assertion based on one source. So these people spoke ecstatically. Okay, so now obviously this is effort to try to promote the idea of speaking in tongues, because now you want to take this and make this... Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls were super awkward for people centuries since. That is true. Let me see. There are so many powerful women in the Old Testament of the Bible. Yes, there are many. There are many examples. Yeah. So have there ever been any Muslim women who talked about how much of an honor it must have been to be in Mohammad's harem? Brainwashed ones? Possibly. Okay, let's continue. So, now, this is a very highly edited, compressed summary, but the aim was to use these apocryphal female examples to justify speaking in tongues. So now you've got this use of these three daughters of Job that are given this gift, and then of course this story gets embellished so that this Spittler guy can make a case for speaking in tongues using an apocryphal text. Fascinating. Right, let's move on. Now, Hillel, okay? So there's two guys that we got to know, and I'm going to get their names wrong. I always get their names backwards. Okay, I'm going to get their names wrong here. At some point, I have to talk about what the notepad. What am I thinking? Hillel and Shammai. I'm going to get them backwards, so let's not get too deep into that. But we will have to get to know Hillel, the house of Hillel, and the house of Shammai. Your Pharisees were split into a couple of camps. There's more than one camp, and these are the two important camps you need to know about. And these guys, yeah, one is more Christian, one is less Christian. So they were, and one of them dominated the other, and of course they moved away from this Christian strand. So Jesus' actions were significantly better than those of the wider culture, right? Jesus spent time talking to and teaching women, when of course the prevailing Jewish view was it's a waste of time. Now the New Testament attitude towards women differed greatly from the cultural norms of the time. Jesus, his actions towards women reinforced his teachings of love and equality in the eyes of God. Right? Yeah, so I miss 80s and 90s. Heck, so do I. You know what? I just watched a movie a little earlier, called Race for Glory, Lancia versus Audi. Fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Was really, really good. So if you have a chance, it opens with some great 80s music, some great 80s action. It was fantastic. Just Lancia versus Audi, a Race for Glory. The Italians versus the Germans. Good stuff. You'd really like it. So yeah, I miss the 80s myself. Okay, so now Matthew 19 addresses the topic of divorce in the historical context. We're not going to go into depth in that, but the Pharisees approached Jesus to test him by questioning the permissibility of divorcing one's wife for trivial reasons, right? Divorcing your wife, like, I asked her to bring me my slippers and she forgot, she has to go, right? So I asked her to bake me some stuff and she burned the toast. She's got to go, right? And this idea of divorcing your wife for trivial reasons was taught by the very popular Rabbi Hillel, right? Now, of course, in Islam, you can divorce your wife by going talak, talak, talak. Send her a text message and boom, that marriage is done, right? Then she has to go and have sex with someone else. It could even be a minor boy, right? As long as he gets it in there, even if just for a moment, she's now had another marriage, and then she can get divorced, and then she can go back to her old husband, because Islam makes perfect sense. So Rabbi Hillel and his followers believed divorce was permissible for any reason that did not make a person happy, which is also why you need to have gender transition, because you're not feeling happy today, right? And the primary Old Testament passage on divorce is Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. This discusses a man being able to put away his wife for uncleanness. Yes, Oratics, no fault divorce. Yes, no fault divorce. Yeah. Yes, N75, it makes absolutely, positively no sense whatsoever. But I've discussed it in the past. If you want to do a run-through of Islam and some of the wackiness in there, yeah, we can do the Sharia again. Just let me know and I can call it up. Okay, so for instance, the law of divorce. When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it came to pass that she finds no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. Okay, and when she's departed out of his house, she may go be another man's wife, so she may remarry. This is the law of Moses, right? This is the law of Sinai. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and giveth it in her hand, and sendeth her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. But in Islam, thank you very much for the donation. Thank you. I'm not sure who that was, but thank you very kindly. So, of course, in Islam, this goes against this law of the Old Testament. This goes against the Mosaic law. Of course, Muslims claim to be, well, we're the original Moses. Moses was a Jew. Sorry, Moses was a Muslim. Jesus was a Muslim. Abraham was a Muslim. Adam was a Muslim. Can't prove any of that, but hey, we're going to make the claim anyway. So, yeah, but of course, it goes against the Mosaic law. But in Islam, like I said, if a woman leaves her husband because he divorces her, he says talak, 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 boom, marriage is over, said the magic word 3 times, spun around, whatever, and off she goes. And then she has to sleep with, and she may sleep with the child, right? She can sleep with a kid, young kid. And as long as he just a little bit, just once, she's now consummated the marriage. That kid might divorce her, or that man can now divorce her, and then she can go back to the other husband after she's, we're like, huh? So anyway, but this goes against Deuteronomy 24:4, right? So after that she is defiled, for that is abomination before the Lord, and thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So in other words, that is what Islam allows is an abomination to the God of the Bible. Okay? Do bear that in mind. So there was debate over the interpretation of uncleanness. How do we define uncleanness? With Hillel suggesting it meant anything a person didn't like. You know, whatever. I don't know. She spilled coffee on my shoes when she tripped on the carpet. Divorce, right? So, for instance, trivial matters like burning toast. I think Hillel needs to go and need some help. So Jesus emphasizes the importance of marriage. So he took out his copy of the KJV, as you know. Jesus said, hold on, let me just grab my Bible. He pulled out the KJV. He says, do you guys have a copy? Would you like a signed one? Want me to initial this one for you? So, and then Jesus started quoting scripture on the unity of man and woman. So Jesus took his KJV, said to Hillel, hey, buddy, hold on. I'm going to quote you from my Bible. Let me give you the, because Jesus, as you know, Jesus said, sola scriptura, buddy. I only follow scripture. Okay? So remember, this is how it works. We follow Jesus. Jesus follows scripture. Remember that one. So actually, no, he didn't do that. So Matthew 19, verse 4. He who created them made them male and female and said, for this reason the man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. Now do understand, Martin Luther, I've discussed this briefly when I do my next Martin Luther, we're going to talk about in more depth about Martin Luther and polygamy, because Martin Luther said, well, you know, the Bible doesn't ban it. So if you want to get 2, 3, 4 wives, because the Bible doesn't say you can't. And yeah, Martin Luther, great theologian, fantastic Christian. Polygamy is just okay. So, but of course, Jesus, I read that and I think Jesus doesn't agree with Martin, but as you know, Martin is more important. So when asked about Moses permitting divorce, Jesus clarifies that it was due to the hardness of your heart, not in line with God's original intention from the beginning. So Matthew 19, 8-9, he said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Because what God has joined together, let not man separate. So, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery, and whoever marries her is divorced. And whoever marries her who is divorced also commits adultery. So, Marius Moshe says, Jesus did not agree with neither the Hillel nor the Shammais. Also, the Jews misunderstood. So, yeah, you can send it over. But look, when you look at Hillel and Shammai, I'm not saying that either of these were Christian. What I'm saying is there are certain parallels in one of the groups that is kind of paralleling New Testament ideas. There are certain ideas there, and those got squashed eventually. So, Artsy Fartsy says the Bible doesn't ban polygamy. It just shows you how it ends tragically every time. David and his wives and Abraham and so on. Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to cocaine anyone? Yeah, that's not banned in the Bible. Good point. So, Jesus permits divorce in cases of sexual immorality, showing a balance between upholding the sanctity of marriage and addressing serious issues in relationships. So that was his view, right? So that's his view. So now Jesus reveals himself to a Samaritan. Okay? So for Jesus, spouses are not condemned to stay in a relationship where one partner is sexually unfaithful, right? So circumstances here are limited to leaving a marriage due to infidelity. So Rabbi Hillel and his followers took a more lenient view. They allowed divorce for, random reasons. Hillel said that one could divorce his wife for spoiling the dish. Now, Hillel was known for puns, so he might have meant that the woman was the dish. She let herself go. She spoiled herself rather than she spoiled the food, right? So there could be the literal and there could be the metaphorical, right? So we are not quite sure exactly how he meant that. His disciples took this literally and so taught that one could divorce his wife if she ruined a meal. Now you can see his disciples are complete idiots, or they are self-serving doofuses. Okay? So in other words, before getting married, just check that your wife knows how to cook. Just so walk up to a girl and say, hey, can you cook? If she says yes, then you can say, well, look, I'm single. Let's talk about having a relationship, or however you do that kind of thing. But yeah, so just don't be like these guys. So Jesus shows very great understanding of women's situations in the New Testament. Take the woman at the well, right? In John chapter 4, Jesus interacts with a Samaritan woman despite societal norms. Chinese telephone, yes, Dr. Obvious, exactly. It's Chinese telephone. Or they were just self-serving. But notice, when you look at Islam, people go, well, those words that you're talking about, those Gnostics, are not word for word quoted directly 110% accurately in the Quran and the other Islamic sources. Well, they don't have to be. They're just corruptions of ideas that existed. These people were idiots anyway, and they're going to change it and alter it to suit themselves. But the idea, we know where the idea came from. So a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. John 4, 5-9. So the Jews and the Samaritans had both a racial and a social divide. Yet Jesus offers the woman living water. So he offers her, as a Jew, he offers this outcast Samaritan living water and engages in a life-changing conversation with her. This is unheard of. Yeah, certain religious divide as well. I will come back to the Samaritans. There's more to be said about the Samaritans. In a sense, just like we have a Gnostic problem in Christianity, where it's like the Gnostics or the Muslims, we're the original Christians. Actually, we were the first Christians. We were Christians since 4000 BC. Do you know that our Quran was actually written by Allah in 4009 BC? Now, we only have a copy from the 900s. The first copy is only from the 900s, but the Quran actually goes back 4,900 years before that. Yeah, Adam was a Jew. Abraham was a Jew. True story. Saul, yeah. King Saul was a Jew. Yeah. Queen of Sheba was a Muslim. Adam was a Muslim. Abraham was a Muslim, my bad. They'll make this claim. Now, so what's weird is, though, that when you look at the Samaritans, they claim, well, we were the original Jews. Do you know that? We were the original Jews. And we actually have the original Bible because we actually have the oldest Bible. Before those Jews, we were actually the Jews. And the Jews came along and the Jews kind of jumped on us and they beat us up. And then they wrote a new Bible and we have the original Bible. Now the Jews have Bible books going back like to 3000 BC, but our Bible dates to about the year 1000, but it's actually older. It's actually older than the Jewish Bible, but we just don't have the actual original copies. We've got a Bible from like 3000 years after the Jewish Bible, but it's actually the original one which comes before. It's just that we don't have the before copies, just like those Muslims. That's the story of the Samaritans in a nutshell. So pretty much that's the whole story. So just like we have this, the Muslims are the original Christians, and we've actually got the original Bible, except it's like 4,000 years after the Bible, or something like that. The Samaritans are like, well, yeah, we have the original Bible. We're the original Jews, but our Bible is 3,000 years younger, but it's actually the original one. We just the Catholic Church just killed us all and then wrote a new fake Bible, and true story. And that's the same nonsense. You've heard this story somewhere before, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, exactly. That's we have the original. Yep, that's exactly the story. Okay, so let's sort of slowly wrap up. Okay, so courtesy. So during Jesus' era, there were 5 to 7 schools of Judaism, depending on how you count. So there were multiple schools. Now, if you look at the Pharisees, there was more than one divide amongst the Pharisees as well, right? So you can't. It's not always a good idea to just lump them all as the Jews, right? We need to understand which group we're dealing with and what they were thinking. Right? So they were the Essenes, very ascetic, right? There were Sadducees, mainly priestly families of which Josephus was a member. You had the Pharisees, 2 or 3 groups, depending where you put Jesus and the first generation of his followers. Now, hold on. 2 or 3 groups. So could Jesus have been a Pharisee? Because Jesus was challenged by the Pharisees because he was dealing with issues the Pharisees dealt with. And so therefore, those evil do you know Jesus was an evil Pharisee? So for all those who follow Luther and who hate Jews, and there's lots of those Christians around, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, Jesus was a Pharisee. That's bad. That's really bad. So, yep. And there's the house of Shammai. They were the ones with the majority in the Sanhedrin and actual political power. These are the ones who condemned Jesus. Then you had the house of Hillel. They give rise to modern-day Judaism and probably Christianity. So that was the strand. It could be, I might have made a typo here. It might be the other way around, okay? It could be Hillel had the majority and then Shammai. Just so forgive me if I've made an error here. And then it's not critical to this discussion. I need to get back to this sometime. But yeah, you just have an idea at least. Jesus and his followers who were extremely close to the teachings of Hillel. It could be Shammai. So just hold on that thought. Most writings of the New Testament follow the Mishnah of Hillel, right? Could be Shammai, just as I might have made a typo there. And yet the Sicarii, or the Zealots, the original sect of Judas Iscariot, hence the name, right? The Sicarii, Iscariot. And they were extremists. And depending if you count them as Jewish, the Samaritans. So the Samaritan woman was a saint in the Catholic Church until the 80s. She's still in the Orthodox Church. Okay. Saint Fatina, or Svetlana. Okay, Svetlana. Interesting. So let me see. Oh, the Sadducees were also against the oral tradition and just the Torah and the prophets alone. Very interesting. Jesus was viewed as a competition to the Pharisees. Yeah. Okay, so let's slowly wrap up. Let's talk a little bit about these Samaritans, because this is important. So the Samaritans are a heretical group. Now, his disciples are surprised that Jesus is talking to a woman. And at this point, his disciples came back. And they marveled that he talked with a woman. So understand, these men are part of that milieu where you don't talk to women and you don't have religious discussions with women. Right? John 4, verse 27. So this sinful, immoral woman is the first person in the New Testament that Jesus tells who he is. This is unusual. He doesn't go to someone important. He speaks to this sinful woman and he tells her, I can give you living water. He basically tells her symbolically, metaphorically, in a language that culture understands, that he's the Son of God. He's the chosen Messiah. Right? And he selects a woman, which is like, huh? And he selects a Samaritan, right? Which is unheard of. So the Samaritans were a mixed, partly Jewish, partly pagan population. They were despised and rejected by Jews, and there was mutual hostility and religious rejection between them. The Samaritans' ancestry can be traced to the northern kingdom of Israel and intermarriage with various foreign populations. I believe there's some sort of prohibition about that within the Old Testament. So this led to the Samaritans being regarded as ethnically and religiously distinct from the Jews. They had their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which was considered heretical or pagan by the Jews. And Jesus' decision to go through Samaria and his positive interactions with the Samaritans broke down certain social and religious barriers that went against the historical animosity between the two groups. So understand, here you've got this idea of we're all one and we should all love each other. Now, this doesn't mean I think they were naive, but understand this goes against the historical animosity of the day. Now, the heresy of Simon the Samaritan. So Simon Magus, 1st century. This is your first Gnostic, perhaps. This is where the term simony comes from. And he was one of the first major opposition to the early Christians. He was a Samaritan. Now, this is important because this idea doesn't die. This idea continues. Simon Magus spawns followers, and they spawn followers, and they spawn followers, and they spawn further disciples. This idea continues through history. So, only love says, right, just as was the females who first saw Jesus at the tomb and not men. Yes. Okay, so Artsy says, I think it's amazing that the Samaritan woman didn't react badly to Jesus telling her all she's ever done. She could have gotten defensive, but instead she loved that she was understood. Yeah, he listened, he understood, he related. And yeah. So to a large part, the attitude of the church to the Jews for most of the time could be basically described as the attitude of the Jews towards the Samaritans, for good or ill. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So let me see. Now, known as Simon Magus, he is detailed in Against Heresies by Saint Irenaeus. You should actually read Against Heresies. If you want to get into the early church fathers and the early church and the beliefs, this is a really good read. St. Irenaeus, Against Heresies. You can find the entire volumes online. It's worth having a read through that. And the crazy part is how much sort of Protestantism you see in these ideas. It's nuts. So yeah, he was also a Samaritan, Dr. Jonathan Gemmell. So yeah, that's interesting. He was a Samaritan, and that's actually important. So he was described as a magician who led people astray by claiming to be a divine being, even deified by followers in Rome, where he was honored with a statue. So this guy wasn't some random dude that came along. He had impact. He believed that the apostles' miracles were performed through magic, and he tried to acquire the ability to bestow the Holy Spirit by offering money to the apostles to gain holiness, right? Simony, we call that. This is becoming known as the sin of simony. He was rebuked by Peter in Acts 9:8-9-11. But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used sorcery, and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed from the least to the greatest, saying, "This man is the great power of God." And to him they had regard, because that of long time he had bewitched them with sorceries. So Simon claimed to be a divine being. He equated himself with different manifestations of God. The Son to the Jews, the Father to the Samaritans, and the Holy Spirit to other nations. So this was a very quasi-Trinitarian tritheism. Tritheism is where there's three gods. It's not one God in three persons, one holy essence in three persons, but this is three gods, the idea of three gods. If anyone knows, what's his name, Orlando, whatever the stupid thing, yeah, Lloyd believes in three gods, whatever, that guy. So this is a very quasi-Trinitarian tritheism, which is really interesting. But notice, historically, what is important, what is interesting here is that why is he promoting the idea of a Trinity in the first century? This is the middle of the first century. I thought the Trinity was a heresy. I thought the Trinity didn't exist. I thought the Catholic Church made up the Trinity in 431 BC at the Council of Teota-Corolla. So what happened was the Teota Council offered low-priced oil changes to the bishops, and therefore, as a concession, they decided to give them Trinity, and therefore they would get low-cost oil changes for the rest of the century. That's true story. That's what happened. So the Trinity was invented in 431 AD because of the Council of Teota-Corolla in Spain, Italy. But this is a different Spain, which is part of Italy, not the Spain. It's Italian Spain. So that's how that works. So yeah, so interesting. You've got this historical reference in the first century to the Trinity, which only existed in the 4th century. Sure, whatever. Okay, so he was glorified as a god. He was denounced as a heretic by early Christians, right? He was a modalist. Yeah, who knows? I mean, look, they would blend these heresies, right? These people would make it up as they went. They would blend heresies. You'll find this. You'll find this in the sources. They would make it up as they went. Read St. Irenaeus. He'll tell you. They would just wake up one morning and they got fresh ideas. Or you beat one idea down and they come up with a fresh idea. They reinterpret it. That just wouldn't end. So that Simon Magus was the founder of Gnosticism is mainly attributed to Hippolytus. So the idea that he was the first Gnostic or the founder of Gnosticism is attributed to Hippolytus. Now, he may not have been the founder, but he could well have been the popularizer, right? And this is attributed to Hippolytus of Rome, an early Christian writer and theologian. In his work, Refutation of All Heresies, he describes Simon Magus as the creator of Gnostic teachings and practices. You'd have to go here to the New Advent Encyclopedia to find out more about this. This is the Catholic Encyclopedia, of course. So yeah, anywho, but that's a real human that once existed. Okay, I'll do a final page. So now, the Great Declaration. Just minimize that. So, have I missed any comments? No. Okay, so surviving traditions about Simon appear in texts by Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, Hippolytus, and Epiphanius, where he is often described as the founder of Gnosticism. Now, this is the diagram of the Simonian eonology. Eonology, the aeons. We discussed those in the early part of the series. You have the universal principle, the boundless power, the universal root, the magical triangle, the magical circle, the blah, blah, incorruptible form, the universal mind, the nous, the great thought. It's Gnostic. See, the great thought. We discussed that. Okay, the mind, heaven, the voice, the sun, the reason is air, the image from the incorruptible form, alone ordering all things, the reflection, which is water, the name, which is moon, and thought, earth. Powers who were generated by thought. You see, yeah, none of this is Christian. The guy's completely off the rails. None of this is Christian, right? So the Simonians were a second century Gnostic sect. They regarded Simon Magus as their founder. So now this continues. This goes on. These wacky ideas continue. They like these memes, like little viruses. They continue, and they trace its doctrines, Simonianism, to him. So the second century group gets doctrines from Simon. So these ideas lasted over a century. Now you've got this group. Now they flourished in Syria, in districts of Asia Minor, and in Rome. And in the third century, remnants still existed, which survived until the 4th century. Now, very often what happens is the sect will die out, they'll whatever, but the idea will continue somewhere and pop up 50 years later, pop up 100 years later. Right, so Justin Martyr, in Apology, 152 AD, speaks 4 times of Simon. The sect of the Simonians appeared to have been formidable. They were genuine enemies, strong enemies of the church. So a native of Samaria, he wrote that nearly all the Samaritans in his time were adherents of a certain Simon of Gitta. So Justin Martyr writes in 152 AD that, and he's from Samaria himself, that nearly all the Samaritans were Gnostics. That is a crazy idea. See, so the Samaritans are important because they're all Gnostics. And they claim to be the original Jews, and they claim to have the original Bible. And then they go to great lengths to claim how their Bible is the true Bible. And they've got all these weird interpretations, and you're like, you understand? So this actually becomes an interesting historical story. So, mentioned by Hegesippus, Simonian doctrines are quoted and opposed in connection with Simon Magus by Irenaeus, the Philosophumena, and Epiphanius of Salamis. Man, good gosh, I can't say that word. Okay, so Origen also mentions that some of the sect were called Helleniani. Only love says amen, nothing new under the sun. And Eusebius, History of the Church, mentions that St. Peter was chasing Simon Magus all over, even to Rome. Yeah, and yeah. So, like Simon, Menander, who was a pupil after Simon's death, his most important successor, taught the creation of the world by angels who were sent by the Ennoia. And I've spoken about this before. These, again, now we're dealing with Gnostic concepts. These are by no means Christian. So you've got to wonder how much of this made its way into the Samaritans, and the Samaritans are still around today. So Basilides is identified by Irenaeus with the further development of his predecessor's ideas. Simon's work is an earlier form of the Valentinian doctrine, and a mixture of Hellenism and Hebraism. So this is a mixture of Jewish thought in Greece, then the old Hebraic thought, let's say coming out of the Talmud and some of that tradition, mixed with Gnosticism, and boom, here you go. Now you've got this wacky mix of paganism equals Gnosticism, right? Now they start from an assertion of Moses that God is a devouring fire. God is a devouring fire, the Balrog, Deuteronomy, Deuteroscopy 4:24. So Simon added the philosophy of Heraclitus. I've discussed Heraclitus in my discussions on atheism. The man is an incoherent fool. Now, everyone will go, well, Heraclitus said some really wise things. He also said some incredibly stupid things. I mean, genuinely, idiotically dumb. Like legendary, heroically dumb. You've got to be incredibly stupid to say some of the things this man said. So that's Heraclitus. And Heraclitus, of course, is one of the patron saints of atheism. Ask any atheist. They go, well, Heraclitus said, because you see, we believe in rational thought, and Heraclitus, that idiot, patron saint of atheism. So he added the philosophy of Heraclitus, this completely incoherent fool, which made fire the first principle of all things. That's occultism. So now you've got Gnostic pagan occultism / atheism / Gnosticism, but that's all good Christianity. So yeah, whatever. So hopefully this has been interesting to understand, and this all comes out of the Samaritans, and this affected the Samaritans. So almost all the Samaritans were at some point followers of this twit with these stupid ideas. All right, so I think I'll stop here. Hopefully that's been interesting. I will try and do a stream tomorrow. I've had a really busy week. I was incredibly busy. I had to finish this project, which is done, and it was exhausting, but I got it done in time. So so things are quieter again. So hopefully next week I can get back to my usual schedule. But I will certainly be on with Francis Boole on Sunday. Right, so Francis, I'll see you on Sunday. So guys, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the donation earlier. I'm not sure who that was. I'll have to check in my emails, but guys, thank you. Hopefully this has been enlightening, interesting. You've learned something. Hopefully it's been helpful. Dragon, wonderful to see you. Romeo Emilio de Sanchez, and then Conociendo del Islam. I know you came in early. You mentioned your Skype address. Look me up on Skype. My name.surname. Absalom's Tube. Martin Luther destroyed your childhood. Martin Luther lied to you through his teeth. Seriously, Martin Luther is just... I can't tell you how much I want to grab that man and just choke him. I just want to shake him, put my fingers on his neck and just choke that guy. Slap him in the face, because holy moly, that seriously. Yeah, I mean, wow. Talk about evil. Talk about corrupt. That's Martin Luther. And talk about how amazing the propaganda to defend this ugly, filthy man's name is. It's just shocking. How so yeah, guys, thank you. And Cassie, welcome. Except Martin Luther might enjoy that. Yes, Alethea, now that you mention it, he might. This knowledge is very good and you're funny. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So guys, yeah, thank you then. Have a wonderful Friday further. Have a great weekend. I will maybe see you guys tomorrow. Otherwise, definitely on Sunday with Francis. We'll be on again. As a former agnostic, Artsy says, I appreciate you showing us the flaws in the beliefs. Truly doing God's work. Well, thank you. Much appreciated. So yeah, thank you guys. All that. So have a wonderful day. And take care, guys. God bless.